And so I think really the best way to think about marketing writ large is that marketing is an exchange of value. It is navigating the exchange of value between company and consumer.
Hello and welcome to Forward Slash Real Estate, the podcast for the technology enabled real estate agents. I say this every time, but I've got an episode for you guys that I am particularly excited about. We're going to be talking to Matt Johnson, and I'm going to let him just give the introduction on what we're going to do here. But this is going to be a lot of like marketing 101, exactly how you need to think about marketing, branding, the perception of all of this stuff in your clients' minds. This is the episode that you're going to want to watch or listen to several times as you're planning out all the automated emails that you're going to end up writing using whatever marketing automation system you end up using. I'm your host, Chris, and let's just get started. So, Matt, can you give us a quick bio on who you are?
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. Yeah, so my name is Dr. Matt Johnson. I am a professor of marketing and consumer psychology at Holt International Business School. I originally come from the world of academic neuroscience. So my PhD work actually focused on something totally different than marketing. I focused on the neuroscience of perception and communication. So effectively how we take in the raw sensory details of the environment, the sights and sounds, the haptic sensations, how we interpret these, how we build these rich inner worlds that effectively only we can experience, right? Consciousness is a private internal experience. And then ultimately, how do we share these ideas and concepts in the social environment? So following my PhD studies, my work and my research, my writing has really focused on applying this perspective to marketing and branding. So really helping marketing teams, helping brands harness insights from these fields. I was an expert at residence with Nike. I've worked with Shopify. I've worked with a few real estate brands. I've worked with a lot of sort of direct-to-consumer, specializing in B2C companies. Written a couple books in this area as well. So Blindsight came out in 2020, and then Branding That Means Business with The Economist in 2022.
That's so good. And we're going to have all the links to your books and blogs down below. So you guys can scroll down right now and open up your extra tabs because this is going to be good stuff. Like I said, I'm super excited for this conversation because, as a marketing guy, these were the classes that I loved in college. So yeah. Okay, so you threw out a lot there, and it's safe to say that you're probably the most credentialed person we've ever had on the show. So let's just start digging in, and maybe with like a really light, simple question, like, what is marketing?
Yeah. So it's a funny question, right? Because you're in a room full of, I don't know, 1,000 marketers, and you ask what is marketing, and you're gonna get 999, 998, maybe different responses. It's one of those things that we all understand pretty intuitively, but really coming to a sort of a concrete definition is a bit challenging. And so I think really the best way to think about marketing writ large is that marketing is an exchange of value. It is navigating the exchange of value between company and consumer, right? That at a business level, like you as a company have to have something of value to someone at some point, right? If you have nothing that you can send out into the marketplace, it's going to be valuable to someone at some point in some way. Like you have no chance of becoming a solvent business, right? And so really the art and science and practice of marketing is the navigation of this exchange of value. You're sending something out into the marketplace that you hope and you pray and you cultivate and you sculpt into something valuable. And it has to be perceived as valuable by your customers, by a target market, right? You don't have to be all things to all people, but you do have to be perceived, or your products or your offerings do have to be perceived as valuable by someone, right? So if we're thinking about defining marketing, broadly speaking, it really is the navigation of an exchange of value between company and customers in a way that's ideally beneficial for the company, right? So you're trying to navigate it to your advantage. If we're getting into what is ethical marketing, I would argue that it's a navigation of this exchange of value in a way that's not just beneficial to the company, but also is mutually beneficial to your customers. If we're going to get into what's corporate responsibility, we're kind of adding another line there. So not just beneficial to the company, not just customers, but the broader good, whether that's the environment, whether that's sort of aspirational ideals of equality. But that would be kind of how we get into sort of corporate responsibility as well.
One thing you made me think of is that movie Field of Dreams, which I think, not to lead the witness here, but like in my personal opinion, is like the most damaging movie ever created in the world of marketing, because the tagline that the ghosts were saying or whatever was like, "Build it and they will come," uh, which is like, if you create a product, it doesn't automatically mean that they're going to come. There's a lot of steps in between here and there.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Field of Dreams. I was just earlier today watching this clip. I don't know if you're familiar. There's this show called Peep Show, which is this kind of a little bit esoteric British show, but one of the characters opens up a bar and just clearly has no idea what they're doing. The other character who's a little bit more intelligent says, "Well, what's your plan? What's your market research?" And he's like, "Market research, if you build it, they will come," right? He's like, "Your market research is Field of Dreams." And it's, yeah, speaks to this exact point, right? I do think there's some exceptions there for sure. I think really what that impinges on is this broader concept of market orientation, right? So typically what happens is, you're a brand, you're a company, and part of the development of your growth into a company with a unique brand, a unique product, is you're identifying unmet needs in the marketplace. You're understanding those needs, you're understanding unique customer preferences, you are collecting that data from your market, you're assimilating them back into your brand, and then you are delivering that back to consumer, right? You are being market driven, finding what consumers want, finding what consumers need, delivering that back to them in your own creative way, in ideally a way that exceeds their expectations beyond whether that was possible for that category, right? So that's kind of a traditional business. But there is an exception there, right? If you think of, there's another category of kind of market driving brands, right? So if you think of, for example, luxury brands. So it's kind of crazy, but they do follow, pretty closely the Field of Dreams model, right? They historically, traditionally do not do any market research at all. If you're a Virgil Abloh or you're a Marc Jacobs, you don't do market research, right? Because you are a creative, you are innovative, you have your own ideals about what cool should be, or what fashion should be, or what the design of a supercar should be, and you don't ask consumers what they want. You have this kind of ideal that's separate from your market, and you tell them what's cool, right? You're not a taste chaser, you're a taste maker, and you drive demand. And that's typically associated with luxury brands, luxury fashion in particular, but it's not exclusive, right? So you could point to Apple, you could point to Bose, you could point to Bang& Olufsen. There's certain technology companies that by virtue of their innovation and their creativity and their ingenuity are able to drive that demand instead of trying to gather those market research insights and then delivering it back to their consumers.
Yeah. Okay. So this is going to pick up on something I want to ask you about later. I want to take a stop before we get there, because it does seem like there's, always this chicken and the egg question of, have I identified a market demand because I was just prescient, or did I do a bunch of research on my existing clients to find out why I resonate so well with them and then like drive that home? But first, I think it's probably good to start thinking about like, what even is a brand?
Yeah, yeah. So if we're going back to the definition of marketing, right? So marketing is a navigation of the exchange of value between company and customers. The brand is a tool of the company which enables it to navigate that dynamic and navigate that relationship effectively and to its advantage, right? So this goes back to what we spoke about at 1,000 watt, where if we're defining what a brand is, on the one hand, it is very corporate. It is a tool of the company that enables it to navigate this exchange of value. It adds unique benefits in terms of differentiating it from unique from competitors in the marketplace, adding unique value above and beyond the product itself, and as well identifying the company's offerings. So if you go into a Foot Locker, right? There's Asics, there's Nikes, there's Adidas, there's Under Armour. You don't have to like look under the tongue of each of those to see manufactured by Adidas, manufactured by Under Armour. You can see the unique brand iconography, and that identifies the offerings, right? So a brand is in the service of the company. The brand is not the company, but it really helps the company navigate this exchange of value effectively.
Is the brand you said it's a tool for the company, but where does the brand live? Is that in the consumer's head, or is that something in a document that lives in a locked vault in Nike's HQ? Like, where is the brand?
Totally. So the brand, certainly from a corporate perspective, does have uh, some instantiations at a corporate level, right? So there's a lot of IP, there's a lot of brand associations, brand reference, and the company will defend those legally. But really, if we're talking about the actual impact the brand has and its ability to exert that influence and have those advantages, we're really talking about how the brand is able to instantiate these associations into the mind of the market. So if we're looking at this from the other side of the coin, the brand really exists nowhere else but in the mind of the consumer, right? So every one of us, if you ask them about a global brand, whether it's Volkswagen or Nike or Kit Kat or Mars Bar, right? They're going to have a certain set of associations that come up. And if we're to aggregate those idiosyncratic associations that any given customer has over the total addressable market, that's what we would call the brand image. And insofar as the brand is consistent and they have a sort of a common identity and a common way in which they appear in the marketplace, those associations that people develop are going to be roughly consistent. They're going to be roughly the same across individuals. So if you ask people, all right, give me three adjectives you associate with Volkswagen, most people are going to say, German, value car, Beetle, something like that. There's going to be a few, at the margins that would think of Volkswagen as being, luxurious or fast or speedy or something. But, brands are kind of living dynamic things. They're concepts that are vague and ambiguous and do admit to individual interpretation. Everyone has their own kind of unique associations that build in their minds. But generally speaking, the brand image is kind of the aggregation of all of these idiosyncratic, unique associations. And that ultimately is what gives the brand its power to be able to serve as an asset for the company. If the company is not instantiating these connections, essentially it has no ability to have any power in the marketplace.
Okay, so and I think maybe it's first of all, like, because we're talking about like high level, like big international brands, but I think this works also, at an individual level. So if you're a real estate agent that focuses on like one neighborhood inside Austin, like, is it fair to say that like your brand, maybe to simplify all this, your brand is what your clients say about you? Like if they someone else at 1,000 Watts said something that was really good, I liked it was like, uh, you know, when you ask your clients to describe your brand, like that's what your brand is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can, have other conversations about, kind of the internal representation of the brand and what it means in terms of your internalized constitution and your IP. But really, if none of that is translated in a reflective way into the mind of the market, or is reflected totally differently, such that it doesn't even resemble what you have in mind for it, then ultimately it is not working. So yeah, I think the true test of a brand and really its power, its potency, is how it instantiates those connections, and it is what your customers and your key stakeholders are really saying and feeling about the brand. Absolutely.
Meet Move2, your lead's new favorite way to search for homes. The Move2 app is the ultimate mobile companion to your Real Geeks website. Sleek, fast, and insanely easy to use, Move2 turns home searching into an experience your leads will want to come back to again and again. Designed to help your leads find the right home faster, Move2 delivers a smooth, modern search with smart, actionable CTAs right on their phones. Boost your lead engagement with features designed to convert interest into action. With powerful search features mirroring those of your website, your leads can deep dive homes with pools, specific neighborhoods, or even a 3-car garage. If it's searchable on your site, it's instantly at their fingertips on Move2. Move2, mobile search made smarter for your leads and your business.
So I listened to this, and I've heard there's a book which I'll leave in the comments on like what it was, but I think they described a brand as like kind of a container for the way that someone feels about like your company or you or what you do. Um, but maybe this is where you can get in a little bit of like the neuroscience. Like, is this you know, is this like logic and differentiation, or is this like feelings and emotions and memories? And you've used the term association a lot. Like, so maybe we can dig into a little bit about like what's actually happening inside people's heads when they're like building these brand images.
Totally. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of different important components there. So associations, I would say, is broad, and that's I think neutral with respect to the emotional salience of that. So you think of, Volkswagen, and there are going to be some very just like purely semantic things like German engineering that doesn't really have an emotional tone to it. But if you kind of probe a little bit deeper, especially to a fan of that brand, for example, you're going to get to more emotional, words, right? Or a sentiment that we could only articulate via linguistic means, right? So you say Volkswagen, and you're going to get a feeling sense internally about it. Maybe you have strong, fond memories of the reliability of the vehicle, or it makes you laugh thinking back to some of the previous advertisements. And then if you're asking people to articulate those, we only have so many tools to articulate things. It's going to come out linguistically, and you're describing it in words, but those are really, emotionally laden terminology. But I think if we get into really what the potency of a brand is about, of course, the specific semantics are important, but they're important ultimately because they do connote a emotional feeling, right? So being associated with, Germany and German engineering isn't just a fact about it. It's not merely a fact. It also connotes, a deeper sense of maybe trust and reliability and diligence and precision, all things that we maybe associate with kind of, German ideals of automation and machinery and production, and that's what really makes a difference. So if I think we kind of peel back a layer on any of the semantic associations, what we really get is this deeper emotional sentience. And that's ultimately, I think, what's really driving a lot of consumer sentiment, and what ultimately moves people in terms of, being a fan of one brand versus another.
This is kind of why, the term storytelling and marketing has become really popular, over the last couple of years. But it seems like, sometimes I feel like, humans don't actually remember any, sort of like logical fact things. Like we are not actually like super logical beings. We're like sort of emotionally driven story machines. Is that a right assumption, or am I like way off here?
100%. It's true on many levels. So one, there's a ton of psychological research showing exactly that, right? If you give somebody, a story, and then you have them read it or maybe try to memorize it, and you ask them 2 weeks later, tell me about this detail, they're going to be pretty bad at it, right? But if you tell me the gist of what happened, they remember the storyline. There's also experiments showing that if you string a bunch of facts together in kind of random order, people aren't able to remember them. It doesn't really have an impact on the behavior. But if you string those facts together in a coherent story where there's an arc and maybe there's characters and you feel emotionally invested, you actually, one, the story influences your behavior more, but two, you also remember these elements as well. So I think it's true that we're storytelling beings in a psychological sense. I also think it's very true in terms of what actually moves marketing. So it's actually a great experiment that was done very recently by Les Binet, where they looked across, it was something like, 2,500 different advertisements, and they had independent ratings of these advertisements in terms of kind of how much they appealed to our kind of rationality and our logic, and also how much they kind of appealed to more of an emotional claim. And what they expected to find was that, humans are complex, and, we have the rational side, we have the emotional side, kind of a very nice story to tell about how there's this, kind of duality to consumer behavior. But what they found was that overwhelmingly, what ended up making the biggest difference was almost never in any instance, any rational claim. It was almost always in every single product category about the emotion. And so not only does storytelling move us, not all it is storytelling kind of how we organize ideas naturally, but also if that storytelling is connected with kind of emotional resonance, that's ultimately what makes the biggest difference above and beyond the rational and the logic in an advertising and marketing sense.
So this is like a fact that might be, if we take this back to real estate, like I helped you save more by my powers of negotiation, versus a story that's like my clients live super happy lives with their families in the houses that I help them acquire.
100%, 100%. Yeah. So I think really the most important thing, and I would argue almost the only important thing, is how you make the consumer feel. everything else is secondary to that, and everything else is in support of that, right? So you can imagine, whatever claim you're going to make to the consumer. We saved you X amount of money. We gave you all these different options. Whatever you want to describe in terms of just a descriptive account of what happened. If that account is totally independent or totally devoid of kind of an emotional level, it ceases to make any sort of difference. And if it makes a difference, it does so because people in their own heads associate that with an emotional impact, right? You think, oh, well, they saved me a bunch of money. I feel good about that. I have more expendable income. I feel less stressed about my financial situation. There's an emotional association the consumer's making. And so I think what a lot of marketing could do better, and what a lot of marketing maybe should strive to do more, is making that emotional connection more explicit, right? Don't make consumers make those connections on their own. Don't expect that they actually do that. Make the kind of emotional connection up front. And of course, this is where we get into storytelling, because a lot of advertising, a lot of marketing doesn't work on an explicit level. It works on an implicit, nice, nuanced kind of storytelling level. If you tell consumers, hey, feel relieved, feel happy, feel joyous, feel less stressed, that's not really how emotions work, right? You get to be in this more implicit liminal mode of storytelling and nuance. And that's where really the creative execution comes in.
Yeah, we need to come back to that. When you're talking through a lot of that, I'm kind of thinking through like a lot of the perfume or cologne, type ads that are like pure vibes,
Totally.
and they're marketing a product that they're expecting a premium for that, I mean, they can't tell you how it smells, and that would probably be counterproductive. Uh, or the other brand that really comes to mind as you talk through that is like BMW, how they really try and focus on this is the way that you're going to feel driving our vehicle, where I think some of their competitors don't capture that quite the same way. Their brand has been very focused on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's say that you're an agent that's been at it for a while, and I'll give you a common story that we hear ever so often, right? And it's like, okay, so I've been at this for insert number of years here, like let's say 15, right? And I find that I end up working with a certain profile of client, right? And I know that like this certain profile of client, when they come across my desk, like this is gonna be really good. So I think you and I as marketers would probably say, okay, so it does seem like you have a brand there, you have an ideal client, and you would probably like to find more of those people. So we've got to figure out how, like what it is that is driving those people, to you, right? Or what you can say to another client that's going to invoke those same sort of feelings. So how do you start to drill into like what your brand actually means in the mind of like the people that you sort of successfully got thinking the right way?
Yeah, so I think this is really where we get to the core of marketing strategy, right? Because I think at the kind of the core of marketing strategy is really these two components, right? Where you have the what and the who. So marketing strategy is really, what do you do better than anybody else, and who do you do it for, right? So you have your kind of in corny MBA speak, right? You have your unique value proposition, and then you have your target market. And it's important, I think, in kind of the early throes of market research to, do your diligence such that your target market, if you're able to get a value proposition that resonates, is sufficiently large that it would support a business, right? So if your target market is too narrowly constrained, like we're going to make a product for, Iowa-based postal workers, like that's, unless you have a very niche business, which is great, it's not maybe the kind of business that's going to be solvent and has the
Your total
ability.
addressable market might just be too small.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it is a good idea to have do the market research, do the diligence such that your target market can be narrowly defined, and you do have a value proposition that speaks to them directly in a distinct way, in a way that no other competitor is or arguably can, right? So you want to have some kind of moats or some sort of ways in which you can consistently execute on this in a way that's differentiated and proprietary. And that as well, there's at least a target market that's sufficiently large, and that also is slightly nebulous, right? Because all of this is probabilistic, right? We're not saying that we have a target market and that's 100% of our customers, and we're for 100% of them and 0% of anybody else. Because markets are messy, and these are distributions, these are probabilities, and we want to have an appeal that's targeted, and we know we're going to resonate with, we're kind of placing our chips essentially and saying, my marketing budget, my value proposition, my aims are more likely to resonate with this target market than with other people. So therefore my marketing efforts are going there, but you should do so in a way where it doesn't, rule out or doesn't exclude, other people as well, and other markets, because they're, and especially very early on in a business, we don't exactly know how a given brand or value proposition or unique elements of a product are going to resonate. And so if you come out too early and make, that line in the sand saying we're for these people, not for others, that may be very premature, because it could very well be, for other people as well. And typically speaking, as a brand kind of grows and they establish this all important milestone of having that product market fit, their brand does become kind of a bit more abstract and a bit more all encompassing. If you look at a brand like Amazon is one of the ultimate examples, right? So Amazon, they obviously have e-commerce, but they've got, movies and streaming, and they've got Amazon Web Services, and they got Amazon Fulfillment Services, and they've got all sorts of things. And so the Amazon brand, I think, still represents something meaningful, but it represents something meaningful in terms of being efficient and being friendly and having, flexibility and being customer centric. Those are all, relatively abstract concepts that would appeal to all these different verticals, and as well a very wide demographic and a very wide target market/target markets.
We could probably spend months talking about, a international brand like Amazon, or, a large company like Walmart, and like, do they have focused brands that like speak to narrow audiences, or is it better to have this, all encompassing, all appealing, type brand? And I think that, bring this back to real estate. That's something that, we hear people in the industry talking about, which is like, they don't ever want to say no to a deal that's coming across their desk. And I don't think that's what we're saying here, but I think we're saying, like, ultimately you're going to want to have messaging that communicates who the best clients for you are and how you're different from everyone else. So maybe, like, just to touch on this one other piece that I heard you say there, which is a brand should ideally attract but not repel.
Yeah.
That's one way I've heard it said, and maybe we could just drill into this a little bit more. But you don't want to say necessarily, like, I don't want to work with this type of person. You want to say, like, this is who we're going to benefit most, right? Because again, it's like there's a distribution of people that that you work with. It's like there's no such thing as the average person, right?
Totally. Yeah, no, I think that's one thing that kind of gets lost in a lot of the market research is and that's kind of the art and science of developing a customer persona, is it is kind of the aggregation of your target market, right? If you could average all of this incredible human diversity down to a single person that you could therefore have a conversation with and understand qualitatively, and therefore really understand how to serve their needs and how to market to them, like that's number one, great. But number two, like you need to realize that that's a simulacrum and not a reflection of any sort of fact, right? That's a tool, that's a methodology, but we're really dealing with incredible amount of diversity of individuals, and we really can't have that as too tethered to that concept. But I love what you mentioned before about you want to attract your ideal customer, as opposed to with an emphasis on kind of not repelling the people that aren't necessarily in that idealized group. And I think that's really crucial. And I think one thing that comes to mind, especially for real estate, is people go through different phases in their lives, right? And people also go through different contextual shifts, especially when socioeconomic circumstances may shift, right? And that may change how they view themselves, that may change how they view their aspirational self, and even within the same day or the same week, even if our circumstances stay the same, we still are maybe different when we're at work versus when we're different at home versus when we're with family. And so you want to be able to appeal to different aspects of even the same individual person, right? So you could imagine a real estate company that's maybe a bit more higher end on like more expensive coastal properties. And, I think you do want to position yourself where you're very clearly have a target market in mind, and you very clearly are attracting the right people, but you don't want to come across as off-putting for, somebody who aspirationally kind of sees themselves there in 1, 2, 3 years, and they're working hard so they can afford one of these properties. They're going to contact you when they reach this milestone. Like there's just no reason for it. It's just totally unnecessary. So I think that it's a fine art, right? I think that's again where creative execution comes from in terms of web design, in terms of copy editing, in terms of the tone, frequency of emails, etc. Of how you apply that really light touch where you're clearly for something, you have a clear identity, there's conviction there, and you're also doing it in a way where you're not repelling, your non-ideal customer.
So one thing I've been curious, about, and I think is going to get asked is, we have agents that have been around forever, that I think could, and I want to give them a guide to, doing sort of the drill down exercise on like how they get to sort of the deep emotional connections that are going to like really make their messaging resonate. But there's probably like a chicken and the egg question that a lot of people are asking right now, which is like, so do I have to do all this exercise before I start, or do I run my business for a while and then do an inventory of who I'm, having a lot of success with, and then drill in? So like chicken or the egg, like, I've got all this market strategy, market research, like whatever, do I try and have like the fully built thesis at the beginning, or do I do this like later on down my life cycle?